What's up, guys? Back again with another video. Today we're going to be discussing this interview with Glenn Dennis. This was done back in November 1990. Basically, this interview is entailing the alien spacecraft that crashed over there by Roswell, New Mexico, and he basically worked for the hospital over there in the Army Air Force Hospital um, over there in Roswell, New Mexico, and basically had firsthand witnessed the events of the alien bodies. But I wanted to watch it with you guys, see what you guys think. Hopefully, you guys are having a great day. For those that don't know who I am, my name is M. If you like what you're watching, make sure you subscribe, hit that like button if you like the video, and feel free to leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts, concerns, and what you think of it. But anyways, guys, let's get into it, and I'm going to stop or pause if there's anything interesting that he says that maybe we can discuss. And if you have any other videos or anything that you'd like me to watch, just leave a comment down below. Also, you can go into my bio, my email's in there. If you like to discuss anything else with me firsthand, you could always email me, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. But yeah, let's get into it, guys.
Wait, would you just say a couple things? Okay. First of all, the phone was ringing,
Okay, the way I became involved in this was started out in the early afternoon, around probably 1:30 in the afternoon, and I received a telephone call from the mortuary officer out at the Walker Air Force Base, Army Airfield Base, and he was inquiring about what would be the smallest possible casket that we could get that would be hermetically sealed. And at that time, I know that we had used like the 4 feet and caskets. We had used those before, but I thought they also made them in a 3/6. So, but he wanted to know if we had any in stock, and I said no. But if I can make a call to Amarillo, I can have him in, by 7 o'clock the next morning on a truck. So he said, I'll get back to you. And that was the first contact that I had with the base. Then he called back, probably 45 minutes or so later. And he said, I need to ask you some more questions. He said, in case something like this should happen, he said, we need to know what your preparations are for the bodies that had been laying out in the elements, And he said, we need to know also what if your treatments of the bodies are the remains, what could you do to them, and if your treatments, would it change any of the chemical breakdown of the tissues, the blood? Would it make a difference? And I said, I thought probably it would. And I said, of course, he knew exactly how we would treat those bodies because we have an outline from them and what we really have to do. I think he already at that point knew exactly what we would have to do.
Opposed to.
No, I told him, I said, if you have a problem, if you want, if you have something you don't really know what to do about it, let me come out and I'll, try to help you do whatever you want to do. And he said, no, he said,
That's
it,
suspect.
yeah. So anyway, he said, well, we don't really have anything. He said, we're sitting here thinking in case we should get involved in something like this, what would be our preparation? Should we do? Then I went through, I said, do you really want to know how we would do it? Well, yes, we would like to know. So that's when I explained to him that we would have the vats that we would fill up with formaldehyde solution with water, and we put the bodies in them, let them stay there for 24 hours, and then take them out, and then we would pack the bodies in. Would be a sawdust and really a lime. What we would pack them in, then wrap them in the plastic. That's bodies that were badly decomposed. If there was tissue, deep tissue, we would have to do it hypodermically with needles to get to the deep tissue. Then we would have to aspirate the cavities if the cavities hadn't already ruptured, and then put some cavity fluid in those. I said that's, kind of normal procedure.
Point. They offered to.
Well, I offered 2-3 times, yeah. You mean when I offered to take care of them? He said, well, we don't really, right at this time, we don't really need your assistant. But he said, in case something like this should happen, then he said we would be prepared and we would know what to do. Then we got back onto the subject of maybe not damaging any of the chemicals, compounds or anything with the bodies, or tissues, whatever, because and they wanted, how would you pick bodies up like that, and what would you do not to contaminate any of it? Well, I thought maybe what happened, they might have had a VIP or some officer and something that happened. They didn't want wanted to keep it quiet, and they probably wanted to do it themselves, not be involved with the civilian businesses or anything.
After these conversations.
Well, I didn't go out to the base. Yeah, I was curious, but I didn't go out to the base, and probably a couple hours later, and I'd got an emergency call. There was an airman that was injured in an accident, and I took the airman to the base. He rode in the ambulance with me, and I took him out to the emergency room, and that's the way I became really involved out the base. I didn't go out just because I was curious.
Sequence. Time you picked up the airman.
Well, when I got the call, I left the funeral home, and the ambulance went to the scene of the accident, picked the airman up. He did not place him on a stretcher because he had a head injury in the nose. I think his nose was fractured. So I did some minor first aid, and then he sat in the front seat with me all the way to the base. When we got to the base, then he walked into the emergency room. I didn't have to take him in. They didn't bring out a gurney or anything.
So I don't know if you guys kind of are curious as well. What is a mortician being called for to do any type of first aid type of thing, like an ambulance or emergency responder would do? I'm not sure like how back in the 1940s exactly what protocols or things that they had, but I'm not really familiar with it. Like nowadays, you just call 911 and an ambulance or fire truck or the police come, depending on the situation. So it's kind of crazy to think that because there's an accident, they called a mortician to come out to go do some type of treatment to someone that got hurt and then take them on the base. So I don't know if you guys caught that or was very curious about that as well. So I don't know. Just seemed kind of weird to me. Maybe back then, times are different. So people had to be able to cover down because they didn't have the tools, capabilities of what we have nowadays. But I thought I would chime in and see what you guys think about it.
He just walked in on his own. Then I never did see him after that. Then I had this friend that I wanted to talk to and see. This is a lieutenant nurse that I knew quite well, that had only been there approximately, only been commissioned and been out to sign. This was her first assignment to the air base. And I wanted to talk to her, and so I was going down the hall, and first thing, the lieutenant that I wanted to see was coming out of one room, going across the hall to the other, and she noticed it was me. She said, "How did you get in here, and what are you doing in here?" And she said, "You better get out in a hurry." She said, "You're going to get in a lot of trouble." She said, "Would you please leave and get out of here in a hurry?" And then I turned around, and she went on into the other room. Then in about the time I turned around, there was another officer said, "Hey, wait a minute." And I said, "Looks like you had a crash." They said, "I see there's some, in the ambulances out there, I see a lot of wreckage." I said, "Where was the crash?" And he said, "There wasn't any crash." And he said, "Just wait a minute." And then he said, "Wait a minute." And I, stood there for a minute. And he turned around, and evidently he must have waited for somebody else to come out, because there was another officer coming out. He said, "This man says there was a crash out at the base." He said he was inquiring about our crash. And this was when I encountered, he was a red-headed officer, and very nasty, very rough. He said he did not see any crash. There was not any crash. And he said, "You get the hell out of here, and you didn't see anything, and you don't talk to anybody." He said, "You're going to get in a hell of a lot of trouble." And I said, "Look, I'm a civilian. There isn't a damn thing you can do to me about it." He said, "No, but somebody might be picking your bones out of the sand." That's when he made the remark there. Then there was a black sergeant.
So basically, he inquired. He basically heard or seen something was taking place. There was a crash around the base or on the base, and when he said something to this lieutenant, the lieutenant basically tried to, um, overpower him by saying or force him to say like, "Hey, you didn't see anything," or if you did see anything, don't say anything, because if you say anything, then there's going to be consequences. And that's what happens a lot of times now, even now in the government. If you see something and you say something about it, or if you are going to say something about it, they try to persuade you by any means necessary, even if that means threats, which, shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't have to go to that extreme, and people shouldn't have to be able to be censored that way, because the truth should be put out to the people. And yeah, so I find it crazy that he would do that to this man here, Dennis. So yeah, but let's continue.
That was standing beside him. And he said, "Yeah, but he would make better dog food for our dogs." Of course, I didn't understand that, but my father happened to be an old trapper and for a hobby and everything. And I said, "My father uses guys like you for bait in his coyote traps." And then there was two MPs that joined me took me outside, and each holding me by my elbows, and they escorted me out back to the ambulance and followed me all the way back to the funeral home. Yeah, because usually where I parked, there was 3 field ambulances parked in the area where I usually park, where we back up to the ramps. So I just pulled up to the side in front of those and parked out in the front, and the airman and I got out and walked in. So when I got up, went up the steps and up the ramp, and I was walking, going into the emergency room, I noticed that the doors were open, but what was odd about it, there was an MP standing beside each one of the vehicles in the back, standing there. And the doors were open. Naturally, I was curious, and, I just happened to look in. That's when I saw some debris that looked like parts of a plane or something, that they hadn't had a crash. Because I've seen them do this a lot of times, bring in pieces and the old ambulances in. I noticed in 2 of the ambulances there was some debris that was probably 2.5 to 3 feet long and probably high, that was propped up on the side of the ambulance there. They were kind of in the shape of maybe like a half a canoe. They were like the front part of a canoe. And it looked like it might be aluminum, but it looked more like the metal looked more like stainless steel that had been heated. It was blue, kind of a bluish tint to it. But what was odd about it, it looked like around the curved part in the front of the canoe there was some designs or something. It kind of reminded me of maybe some Egyptian signs or whatever. And it was probably about 3 inches and high, and probably the length of what the wreckage I saw, it looked like it was.
So he's basically claiming that he's seen wreckage in the back of these old ambulances. And if you don't know what the old ambulances, they're pretty big. And you're able to store a lot of stuff in the back. It's not something like nowadays where they have all these different machines and they're only able to carry like the person that's being transported to the hospital and maybe a couple people in the back that are monitoring the person, like the EMS people that come out. But he's basically saying that on these crafts, there was Egyptian symbols or foreign symbols that, you know, wouldn't be something that we would put on our aircrafts. So it was basically something that didn't look like anything that we created. And for it to be a aircraft or a spaceship or a vehicle or something of that nature to have Egyptian symbols on it, doing all the way over there in New Mexico, makes you think, what is it? What is it? Because obviously it's not something that we created.
And the same thing was in the other ambulance too. I mean, I saw practically the same thing. The pieces that were practically the same size, and the insignias looked like whatever that might be was part of the wreckage.
Frank.
Well, I didn't know really until the next day. And I called out. I kept trying to get a hold of her because naturally I was curious and I wanted to know what was going on. And so I called out the next day, and then probably around 11:30, she said, "I know you've been trying to get a hold of me, but I haven't been available." And she said, "Why don't you meet me at the officers club? If you have time, meet at the officers club, and we'll have lunch. And I want to talk to you." And funeral home, we had it at that time. We had some of the businesses there had an associate membership to the officers club, and our funeral home had that membership, and also had a card to identify myself and what business that I was, associated with. So I had no problem. One time I'd go to base, all I had to do, a lot of times if it was in the evening, I'd have to stop and sign a visitor's and get a visitor's pass and then turn it in when I left. There was no problem going out there. So I went on out and met her. Beg your pardon? Well, we, both ordered. I'm not sure, remember what we ordered, but it was just a light lunch. But she was so upset. She looked like she was, in shock, is what she really talked like and looked like. And she said, I said, "Well, I was just curious. The only reason I want to talk to you, I was curious on what happened." And she said, "Well, you won't believe it." And she says, "I don't believe it either." But she said, "I got in a lot of trouble on this thing. I'm not real sure about this." But she said, then she pulled out of a little purse or little pocketbook, whatever she had there. She gave me a little diagram that she had drawn some figures of some arms and face and so on. She told me that this is what, was in those, that it was a crash. Wasn't an airplane, but they didn't know what it was at that time. Yeah, but she said we have 3 bodies. That there was 3 bodies. She said 2 of them were very mutilated. one looked like it might have walked out, or that it, might have lived a little while. And she explained they were like 3.5 feet to 4 feet tall. The two of the bodies were you couldn't identify much because they were practically destroyed, and it looked like maybe that they might have been a predatory animal or something might have been doing some damage on the bodies too. Well, she said the head, and in the little drawings that I had, the way she explained it and the way she drew it, that the heads were somewhat larger than a human heads. The hands were long, no thumbs. It was just the long, very delicate fingers at the end on the underside at the tip of each fingers was a pad-like, maybe a little pad, but it looked like the skin had maybe a little suction, like the little suction cups on those. On the no fingernails on the hands. The head, the lips were just a long, narrow, more or less, not full lips like we would have in most of our people, but very fine lined, very fine lips. There was no teeth. That was the inside of the mouth. It was kind of like a real, the gums. Maybe it was. She said to explain it. It was almost as hard as if it was rawhide. Maybe at that. The ears. There was only two small orifices on each side of the head, with looked like a couple of small lobes that might cover both of those, but there was not a protruding ear. And also that the nose, there was only two small orifices in the nose. There was really no nose that was convex. It was all just flush with the face. Very much so. Very emotional. She would have to stop and drink water every once in a while, and also she never touched a meal. At all the time we were talking in an hour and a half that we were there, she never touched her meal.
So the nurse that he basically saw when he went to the hospital, they told him he could get into a bunch of trouble. She's obviously in shock, and you know, at this time, you could tell that from what he's describing, um, it seems like they're talking about the Greys. You know, if you don't know about the Greys, they're pretty. Um, their head is pretty like big. The eyeballs are big. They have two slots in their nose. They don't have like regular ears. You know, they don't have no fingertips. You know, they're really skinny. So that seems like what they're describing. Um, but yeah, so imagine if they would have found out that she disclosed this stuff to him, what type of trouble she could have gotten to. You know, if they're willing to say this to this guy right here, just because he wound up being at the hospital because he dropped off that person that got injured, imagine what could have happened to that nurse because she disclosed stuff like that that was so sensitive to him, you know. Um, but it just kind of makes you think. It just shows that, you know, even in the 1940s, the government was willing to go as far as they could to not let anything get out to the public. You know, any secret information or top secret information, classified information, I should say.
Well, just, every once in a while she'd go like this, and wringing her hands, and she said it was the most I've never been so horrified in my life. I've never seen anything so gruesome in my life. Never smelt anything that smelt worse in my life. And she told me that when I saw her, she was leaving the room to go to the bathroom because she was deathly ill and was going to throw up. She told me, uh, She said, I asked her that question, which of the doctors, and she said, I don't know that, she said, I don't know that I knew them. And that was her answer. So, but she said she walked in the room and they said, hey, we need you. You need to help us. And that was the way she became involved in it. And then she got ill. The doctors also became very ill. They would have to do a little examination, then they'd have to leave and go sit down, and then they would come back and do a little bit more. It was that bad. Well, yeah, we'd visited a while.
Sorry, guys. I didn't know if you could hear me, but basically what I was trying to say was, from what she was telling him was that the doctors and her were getting ill. I apologize. I might have muted my mic when I was trying to explain it, so please bear with me. But so they were getting sick because they weren't used to the body or the alien body composition, because they have foreign stuff in their body that a human body's not able to, or hasn't been able to get used to be able to fight off. So maybe they were viruses or different things that were getting these guys sick, and then two of the bodies that they recovered were already decomposing. So what that could possibly mean is the smell was so bad that it was making them get really, really, really sick. And by us not being able to, be used to what they have, like for instance, if they're coming from a different solar system, then their body has viruses that they already built up immunities to, but we haven't. It's kind of like um back in the day where um Europeans brought over these like diseases and viruses that the Indians weren't, or Native Americans weren't used to. It's kind of like the same concept, except they're coming from a different solar system or galaxy, and they're bringing it to us. So we're cutting these guys open, and we don't know what could happen. We could get deathly ill, we could die, and these nurses and doctors, they were getting sick because they weren't used to it, and it could be the bodies were decomposing so fast because they're not on the same level, or maybe they decompose faster than like the human body itself. So we don't know.
And then I had to get back to the funeral home, go back to work. But then I never did see her after that. And I called out the next day to see how she was feeling, see what, and they told me that she wasn't available. Then I wouldn't be available that day. I called the next day, and they told me that she'd been transferred. And it was rather odd because she'd only been at the base less than 3 months. That was her on commission less than 3 months, and that was her first assignment. So it was rather odd that she would be transferred out, within 3 months.
So a lot of times they do stuff like this because as soon as something happens that's so, I would say, catastrophic, or maybe because so many people had seen this stuff, they'd rather send these people in different directions so that way they're not there to like disclose anything or have a chance to disclose anything. And a lot of times they have to sign non-disclosure forms and also um, go through these intensive interrogations. So that's probably what happened. She probably got transferred, and a lot of those doctors got transferred because they wanted to try to keep it under hush, as much as possible without it spilling over to the public of knowledge that hey, there was an alien craft that crashed, and there was three bodies, two of them really bad decomposing, and one of them was, I guess, he died outside of the aircraft. So I think that's the only way I could think of that they would do that, move them so fast, is because they're trying to keep it under wraps, and they don't want people to they don't want people to know that this has got out, and then they would have to answer all these questions, and they don't. The government don't want to do that.
So then about 2 weeks, probably 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks. Could have been a little longer, but I know it was at least 2 weeks. I got a letter addressed to me at Glendivis at the Ballard Funeral Home. With she didn't sign. It didn't have any returned address or anything on it. But inside of the letter, it was just a note. She said, "I don't have time to write. I will write later. This is my APO number," and that was the extent of it. So then I wrote back to her and asking her more or less how she was feeling and why the sudden transfer, and then I hoped that she wasn't in any trouble. It was just a short note. I really didn't go into a lot of detail or anything. Then probably 3 weeks or probably a month after that, then I got the letter that I had mailed to her. It was returned. It was stamped return, and also it's in red printing. It said deceased, and that's the last time I ever heard anything about it. Then, well, probably then I went out.
Just to stop him right there. So when he's talking about APO number, that means Army. It's an Army installation or particular number. So APOs were most often mobile or moved with the units to which they were attached. So Army, but it's what is APO number? APO means Army Post Office. So that's where like you get mail and stuff sent to, and then the mail would be um, distributed out to each unit, and then that unit would distribute it down to the people that was in the unit, depending on if they had a mail clerk or something like that. Because usually what a mail clerk would do was they would get the mail, and they would hand it out to each platoon, and the platoon would give it to their soldiers or people that was in that section of that unit. So just to clarify, make it a little bit easier. So APO is a Army Post Office. So for you guys that don't know what that means.
Out to the base a few days later, and I was talking to one of the nurses, and I said, whatever happened to the lieutenant? And she said, well, the rumor is that we heard that she was killed with 5 other nurses in a training mission in a plane crash. And that was it.
So now, from what you're hearing from him, is that nurse was killed. Okay. So now that even goes even further back, that the government will do anything possible to stop the information being released, even if that means, quote unquote, dying in a what do you say, training program.
Return, and also it's on in red printing. It said deceased, and that's the last time I ever heard anything about it. Then, well, probably then I went out to the base a few days
Training
later, and I was
exercise,
talking to one of the nurses, and I said, whatever happened to the lieutenant? And she said, well, the rumor is that we heard that she was killed with 5 other nurses in a training mission.
So the government did anything possible to keep that under wraps, and that just goes to tell you, quote unquote she died in a training exercise. Huh, I wonder, after all of a sudden she sees, aliens, and she's firsthand witness to it, they don't want that information getting out. What other way would they do that? For one, they would find some way that it becomes an accident that she got killed, because then the information can't be put out, or she couldn't be a witness to testify against the government. And I think that's pretty crazy that all of a sudden that she died in a training exercise. And a lot of times, the government also does this like protection thing where they change your name and relocate you into a different place, so that way, your life isn't in danger and stuff like that. But um, yeah, I didn't think she was going to die. This is crazy.
Plane crash, and that was it. Well, it was in London, England. She said in the note that she sent me that she was in London, stationed in London, and that was it. That's the last time I ever heard. No, I don't think so. After all that's happening, and after threatening me and everything, I doubt very seriously that she was. I would hope not.
Like say,
So here's another thing too. What if the government? Because a lot of times, government back in that day, at least, they would get in control of documentations, and say you're talking to somebody that they know has firsthand knowledge of stuff. They would sometimes send out stuff to say that, hey, this person isn't alive, or this person, can't talk to you for this reasons and such and such. What if they were just telling him, because he said he was already a civilian, so he didn't have any type of top secret clearance in the first place, was just telling him that, so that way he doesn't go out and dig deeper and try to get in contact with her, because they know that she has this knowledge, and they're trying to keep it under wraps as closely as possible. So that could be another assumption. If you guys think that I'm crazy, I understand. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think that she died? Do you think the government's covering up and she's still alive? What is the possibility all of a sudden, after she's seen aliens and had to operate or help the doctors operate on them, that all this, and she gets moved to London, and her she dies all of a sudden in a training exercise? Just doesn't make any sense.
Well, if she happened to just see it, if she feels like the if she wants to talk, if she feels like I would like to hear from her, yes. See what's been going on in her life and why she wasn't able to contact me. If she, feels like it. Okay, what happened there? Then the next day after I was there, when I had the problem with the officer and the black man, I was told my father was contacted by our sheriff, George Wilcox, which was a very close friend of my father's. They were very good friends. And he called to see if my father was home because he wanted to come out and talk to my father. And he did so, and he told my father that there was a black sergeant from the base that came to his office, was inquiring about who my parents were, my mother and my father, if I had any brothers or sisters, and all, wanting to know what my personal family, who they were and where they were. George said that he knew I had some family, but he didn't know, where they were or anything else. So anyway, he told my father that he did contact my father, and he told my father that he thought I might be in some trouble. And but he didn't. They evidently didn't explain why I was in trouble. So, first thing my father did was get in his car and come to the funeral home. Said we had to talk because he and I were very close. We were real good friends. The best friend I ever had was my father. he said, I've got to talk. He said, if you're in trouble, he said, we've got to do something about it. And I said, I'm not in trouble.
So that sergeant that was there on the was at the hospital that basically came after that redheaded, I think it was a lieutenant, he said, went all the way to the sheriff's department to inquire about his family, to know who his family was, his parents, his brothers, his sisters. To me, that just sounds fishy. Why would you go all the way out to the sheriff's department to know about his family and all this other stuff? Are you trying to kill this man? Are you trying to, get rid of him the same way that they got rid of that lady that was a nurse? Like that right there. This sounds really really fishy. I don't know. Um, and like I said, the government will go to any lengths possible to stop anything from getting out that they feel could jeopardize them or put them in a bad position. So if they're willing to get rid of their own nurses and service members, then civilian doesn't matter. They'll go to whatever links that it is to stop the information getting out. And maybe he'd seen something or heard something that was, not supposed to get out. And now that he has the knowledge of it, they were afraid that he was going to go out and speak on it or tell somebody about it.
He said, well, you are. He said, George Wilcox told me that you were in a lot of trouble and that you got involved in something that you had no business getting involved in and that you could be in a lot of trouble. And I said, then, so I told my father the story, and he's the only man that I've ever told this story to until I talked to Stan Friedman and to you people, and that's it, period. And I did tell my father what the story was. Of course, it was, it was unbelievable for him. But then he became very upset, and he wanted to go shoot a few people and all that because they did threaten my life, and and they. So that was the way my father heard about it, and that was the extent of my family. And he never would tell him who my brother. And I had a brother that was a fighter pilot during that time, and I had 3 sisters, and one of them was a nurse. But he would never tell him anything. And so he didn't tell the sheriff or anybody else because the sheriff was supposed to call him back and give him the names and where they were at, and he wouldn't do it.
Just kind of thought.
Well, the only remark that she ever made was that they definitely weren't humans as we know humans, but they could be from another planet. Or the doctors were explaining this, that they couldn't be from our planet. They had to be an alien, or had to be something else, but not in our planet. Well, she said that. Well, of course they were. First thing she said, they were black. They were just as black as they could be, but probably laying out in the elements in July in Roswell with 105 to 110 temperature every day and 80 degrees or so at night. I mean, that wouldn't be uncommon because we picked up a lot of sheep herders of people that have been found dead that's laying in the desert, for days and bitten by rattlesnakes or whatever. And they do turn, as black as they can. And I know exactly what they were talking about because, with the smell and the odor being so drastic, because this is a very unpleasant situation. And,
So by him saying that they're black, it's kind of like people like me. I get sunburned real easy out in the sun. So if you think these guys are from a different solar system and their skin isn't used to harsh sunlight, um, they could go from gray to really really dark black because their pigments are melon, and they don't probably have a lot of melon in their skin to be able to um, you know um, to be able to protect themselves against the sun. So that's probably what happened. Especially a crash. There's probably an explosion. Two of the bodies had already been decomposing. And if you ever seen like a burn victim or somebody that died and or is being cremated, their body ends up turning a blackish color. So that would basically explain why the UFOs or extraterrestrials or aliens, whatever you may want to call them, um, were looking the way that they did.
Well, she said that, of course, their eyes were set back into the skull. Oh, and it was a remarkable, I thought it was interesting also that she said their skulls, the doctor said their skull bone structure wasn't like ours. It wasn't actually a bone. It was probably a real heavy cartilage. It looked more or less like a newborn baby. The skull was very pliable. You could mash on the skull and it would, it would give. And so the bone structure, it wasn't, bones not like our bones, it was our skull and everything. Said very fine, very delicate, the arm bones, like the radial and the ulnar and in the arm, that was so fine that he doubt if they could lift, she said they doubt if anyone at that size and the arms at that could lift 50 pounds on the earth or anywhere else. They doubted they had that strength. But she said the one that hadn't been mutilated to a great extent, it reminded him of a real small ancient Chinese person, no hair at all, and very, very delicate skin. In fact, he said the skin would look like they could almost see through it, almost transparent. Well, the ears, like I think I stated to you, that the ears, there was a couple of small orifices, one on top of the other, with two little lobe flaps, one over the other. They didn't really know how those, if they had any significance, how they worked or what. They didn't go into that. The nose was only a couple of very small orifices, holes right there, just above the lip line. But it had, there wasn't anything covering it. And it was just like two small indentations there, and that was it. But it was very unusual. Yeah. The hands, well, there was one hand. There was one hand that evidently that wasn't attached to the arm. And she said that where she got sick and left the room was that this doctor had the long forceps and picked the hand up and turned it over. And that's when they noticed that there wasn't any thumb. None of the bodies had any thumbs or anything. They were just long, very fine, very delicate fingers, no fingernails. But right at the tip of each finger, it looked like there was a pad. And in this pad, it looked like it might have had very small they were like little suction cups, very minute suction cups. The doctors, that's the way he explained it, that was looking at it. Really?
Well, let's start.
Seeing if he was ready.
Well, guys, I don't know what you guys think. It's a pretty interesting story as far as like, the way he describes the aliens and what the nurse was telling him, and that the nurse ended up or they say that she died in a plane crash, and then after he was in the hospital, the sheriff's department got contacted by someone from that base, basically asking question about his family and this, that, and the third. It just screams to me like they were doing anything possible to stop any information from being put out. And then the way that they described the aliens and stuff like that, as being like head elongated, having holes where their ears are in their nose, having, no thumbs, long fingers, little pads on the top of their fingers. It just makes you think, like how weird that these things look, to the human eye, and why a lot of people would be so scared of how they look, because they would think that, these like monsters or demons or whatever, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think that this man's telling the truth? Do you believe what he's telling, as far as about the nurse, and then dropping the guy off on the um back on base, going to the hospital, having these saying run-ins with these people from on base, and then them going to trying to figure out who he is, and talking to the sheriff's department, and trying to find out who his family is, and this, that, and the third. You know, I can't tell you what to think, but I mean, it does seem very interesting. And if this is true, it just makes you realize how far the government would go to stop any information from being put out to the people and everything like that. Well, my name is M, and I appreciate you guys for watching this video. If you would, subscribe if you're new to the channel. Leave a like or comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about this video. Do you believe Dennis? Do you think he's telling the truth? If he is, why do you believe that he's telling the truth? And if he isn't, then tell me why you don't think he's telling the truth. Well, is there any flaws to his story? And yeah, if you'd like to see me watch anything else, just make sure to leave a comment down below. Let me know what you'd like to see, or more things that you'd like me to put out for you guys. But I greatly appreciate you guys for watching, and until next time, later.